The station was a pocket of stillness in the night. The air smelled of rain that had fallen hours ago, the kind of rain that leaves the world feeling hushed and waiting. The platform stretched like a forgotten ribbon, its yellow lines glowing faintly under the pale wash of moonlight. A single bench stood empty, its wood darkened by the damp, and beyond it, the tracks disappeared into a forest of shadows. There was no one else here. No conductor, no passengers, no sound except the occasional sigh of wind through the trees. It was the kind of place that felt like a secret, as if it existed only for me. I stood there, my suitcase at my feet, unsure how I'd arrived. The memory of my journey here was blurred, like a dream slipping away upon waking. My coat was thin, and the chill crept in, but I didn't mind. I felt light, almost weightless, as though the night had untethered me from something heavy. I wasn't running away, not exactly. I was simply moving, the way water flows without needing to know where it's going. A faint sound broke the silence, a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It grew slowly, vibrating in the air like a song just beyond my hearing. I turned, and there it was, the train. It slid into the station with a grace that felt impossible, its sleek silver body glinting like a shard of moonlight. No headlight pierced the darkness, yet it seemed to bring its own glow, soft and steady, as if it were made of starlight. The doors opened with a whisper. Inside, the car was warm and dimly lit, the air faintly sweet, like worn leather and old paper. I hesitated, one foot on the step, one still on the platform. Something about this felt inevitable, as though the train had been waiting for me all along. I picked up my suitcase and stepped inside. The seats were empty, their upholstery a deep crimson that seemed to absorb the light. I chose one near the window and sat down. The moment my body settled, the train began to move. It didn't lurch or shudder, it simply drifted, as if we were gliding on water rather than steel. I watched the station recede, its faint outline swallowed by the night. The landscape outside was strange, a dreamscape that seemed to shift with every glance. One moment, the window framed a forest of towering pines, their branches brushing the sky. The next, it was an endless field of silver grass, swaying gently in the breeze. I couldn't tell if we were moving quickly or slowly, if the world outside was changing, or if it was only my mind. I leaned my head against the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the train against my temple. It was a soothing rhythm, like a heartbeat. My thoughts began to unwind, unfurling like ribbons in the wind. I thought of my life, of the people I'd left behind, of the questions I'd been carrying. But here, in this quiet space, they didn't feel heavy. They felt like whispers, like stories that didn't need endings. The train slowed, though I couldn't see why. The landscape outside was dark now, a vast expanse of water stretching to the horizon. The moon hung low, its reflection rippling on the surface like a fragile promise. The doors opened again, and I stepped out. The platform here was different. It was made of smooth stone, worn by time, and the air smelled of salt and something ancient, like the memory of a place long forgotten. A path led away from the platform, winding down to the water's edge. I followed it, my footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. At the shore, the water lapped gently against the stones, its rhythm steady and reassuring. I knelt and dipped my fingers into it. It was warm, almost alive, and when I pulled my hand back, the water clung to my skin like a caress. I looked out at the horizon, where the sky and the sea met in a seam of endless blue. There was no sign of the train, no sign of the path behind me. Only this place, this moment, and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. Somewhere, far away, a bell tolled. Its sound was low and resonant, as if it were calling to something deep within me. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The water whispered, and I listened. I stood at the shore for a while, the water lapping gently against the stones beneath my feet. The air was still, with only the faintest whisper of wind to stir the quiet. It was a strange feeling, standing here, neither fully present nor lost, as though I were suspended between two worlds. The sky above was vast, almost infinite, its deep velvet black dotted with stars that seemed to shimmer as though they were alive. I wondered if they were watching me, if they somehow knew the weight of the silence I carried inside. The stretch of water before me seemed almost too vast to comprehend. It was not an ocean, not exactly. It felt ancient, primal, as though it had existed long before anything else. Its surface shimmered with a faint silver light, and the ripples rose and fell in a rhythm that felt deliberate, alive almost. I thought of stepping forward, of walking into it, but something stopped me. It wasn't fear, it was reverence. When I turned, I saw something move in the distance. A figure, perhaps, or a shadow against the moonlight. My breath caught for a moment, my body instinctively stilling. But it wasn't threatening. It was something else, something calm, almost familiar. I hesitated, watching as the figure approached, its movement slow and deliberate. It was a man, or something like a man. His shape was human, but his skin seemed translucent, as though it were made of the same silver light as the water. He wore flowing robes that shimmered faintly with every step, the fabric catching the starlight. His face was soft, unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet knowing, a gentleness that felt like an invitation. He stopped a few paces away from me, his gaze meeting mine without urgency. For a moment, we simply watched each other, the silence between us full of something I couldn't name. "You've arrived," he said at last. His voice was low and soothing, like the sound of distant waves. It carried no surprise, as though he'd been waiting for me, as though this moment had always been inevitable. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. My voice felt lost somewhere in the quiet, tangled in the strangeness of this place. The man smiled faintly, his expression filled with understanding. "You've come far," he said, his tone soft and unhurried. "But this is a place of rest. You are safe here." I didn't ask where here was. It didn't seem necessary. The question felt small in the face of the vastness around us. The stars, the water, the silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Why did you come?" he asked, his voice carrying a gentle curiosity. I hesitated. The answer felt just beyond my reach, like a dream I couldn't quite remember. I thought of the train, the way it had seemed to call to me, how stepping onto it had felt like surrender, like letting go of something I didn't even know I'd been carrying. My life before this moment felt distant, almost unreal. "I'm not sure," I said at last, my voice barely audible. He nodded, as though my answer made perfect sense. "Sometimes we don't need reasons," he said. "Sometimes it's enough to trust the journey." The words settled gently in my chest, filling me with something warm and calm. It wasn't an explanation, but it felt like an answer all the same. Something inside me softened, like a knot unraveling. "Will you walk with me?" he asked, gesturing toward the path that wound away from the shore. His tone carried no pressure, only an invitation. I hesitated for a moment before nodding. Without a word, I followed as he began to walk, his steps slow and unhurried. The path ahead was narrow, winding through tall grasses that swayed gently in the breeze. The air smelled faintly of salt and something sweet, like wildflowers blooming unseen in the darkness. The further we walked, the more the landscape changed. The grasses gave way to a forest, its towering trees filled with leaves that shimmered faintly in the starlight. The ground beneath my feet was soft, cushioned by moss that seemed to glow faintly as if alive. It was unlike any forest I'd ever seen, quiet, serene, filled with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The man walked ahead of me, his robes brushing lightly against the moss. He paused once, glancing back to ensure I was still following, but neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt natural, as though it were something alive, something that didn't need to be filled. After a while, we came to a clearing. In its center stood a pool of water, so still it seemed like glass. Its surface reflected the stars above, the image so perfect it was impossible to tell where the sky ended and the water began. The man stopped at the edge of the pool, gazing down into its depths. "Look," he said softly. I stepped closer, kneeling at the edge of the pool. The reflection was strange, not just the stars, but something else, something faint and shifting. For a moment, I thought I saw my own face, but it wasn't the one I knew. It was older, softer, filled with a quiet peace I didn't recognize. The man knelt beside me, his gaze fixed on the water. "This is a place of truth," he said. "It shows not what is, but what could be." I watched as the reflection shifted, the face in the water fading into something new. For a moment, I saw a room, simple, filled with light, a place that felt like home. Then it shifted again, a face I didn't know but somehow recognized, a smile that filled me with something deep and unnameable. "Is this the future?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head. "It is a possibility. Only that." The reflection shifted again, and this time it was the stars, their light shimmering faintly across the water. I felt something inside me stir, something quiet and hopeful, though I couldn't explain why. The man stood, brushing his robes lightly. "Come," he said, his tone gentle. "There is more to see." I hesitated for a moment before rising, my gaze lingering on the pool's stillness. Something about it felt unfinished, like a story waiting to be told. But I followed him as he led me away, the clearing fading into the shadows behind us. As we walked, the forest began to change once more. The trees grew thinner, their branches twisting upward like outstretched arms reaching for the sky. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of rain, a promise of something yet to come. At last, we emerged onto a hillside. The ground was covered in soft grass that shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and the view stretched out before us, an endless expanse of rolling hills and towering mountains, their peaks catching the light like crowns. "Look," the man said again, gesturing toward the horizon. I gazed out over the landscape, feeling something inside me stir. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen, but it wasn't just the sight that filled me. It was the feeling, the vastness, the stillness, the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The man stood beside me, his robes catching the faint glow of the moonlight. "This is a place of beginnings," he said, his voice low and steady, "and endings. Of moments that linger, and those that pass too quickly." I nodded, though I couldn't quite understand his words. There was too much to take in, the stars, the hills, the quiet that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Is this real?" I asked at last, my voice barely audible. He turned to me, his gaze filled with a quiet understanding. "Does it feel real?" I hesitated before nodding. It did. More real than anything I'd ever known. He smiled faintly, his expression filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Then perhaps that's all that matters." We stood in silence for a while, the stars shimmering faintly above. The air around us felt still, almost reverent, as though we were standing in the presence of something sacred. Eventually, the man turned, gesturing toward the horizon. "The night is long," he said, his voice carrying a quiet promise. "But it will not last forever." I watched as he began to walk away, his robe shimmering faintly against the grass. For a moment, I thought to follow him, to ask where we were going, what this place was, what it meant. But something stopped me. At the edge of the hillside, the stars shone brightly, their light catching the edges of the clouds. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the breeze carried the distant sound of birds singing, their voices soft and soothing. I closed my eyes, letting the silence fill me. Somewhere in the distance, a bell began to toll. The bell's toll lingered in the air, its resonance weaving itself into the stillness around me. I opened my eyes, but the sound didn't fade. It was as though the bell were echoing not from the hills or the sky, but from somewhere deep within me, a place I hadn't known existed. The man was gone now, his shimmering robes and quiet presence dissolving into the night as softly as a dream upon waking. I didn't call after him. I didn't need to. His absence felt natural, like the ebb of tide, and I knew, in some quiet way, that he had left me exactly where I was meant to be. The hills stretched before me, their soft curves bathed in starlight. I began to walk, not with urgency, but with a kind of surrender, letting my feet carry me where they would. The grass beneath me felt alive, its coolness a gentle counterpoint to the warmth still lingering in my chest from the man's words. This is a place of beginnings, he had said, and endings. I wondered which this was for me, or if it was both, if the two could exist in the same moment, tangled like roots beneath the surface. As I walked, the landscape began to shift, though it happened so subtly I almost didn't notice. The hills softened into plains, the air grew lighter, and the stars seemed to lower themselves, as if they were trying to touch the earth. I thought of the pool and the clearing, of the reflections I'd seen there, my face, the room filled with light, the smile I didn't recognize. It shows not what is, but what could be. The words stayed with me, a quiet hum in the back of my mind. I came to a small stream, its water clear and still, reflecting the endless sky above. I knelt beside it, letting my fingers trail through its surface. The water was cool, almost soothing, and as I watched, it began to ripple, as though something beneath the surface were stirring. For a moment, I thought I saw shapes forming in the water, familiar shapes, figures I couldn't quite place but felt I knew. They danced and dissolved, fleeting as shadows, and then they were gone. Are you searching for something? The voice startled me, though it was soft, almost kind. I turned and saw a woman standing a few paces away. She was older, her hair silver in the starlight, her face lined with the marks of time. Her presence felt different from the man's, grounded, earthy, as though she belonged to the land itself. I hesitated before answering. I'm not sure, I said at last. She nodded, as though my uncertainty made perfect sense. Searching doesn't always mean looking for answers, she said. Sometimes it's just about noticing what's already there. Her words settled somewhere deep inside me, a quiet truth I hadn't known I needed. I looked down at the stream again, its surface now smooth and still, and for the first time, I noticed the way it reflected not just the stars, but the trees, the sky, the faint outline of my own face. It was all there, waiting to be seen. Come, the woman said, her voice gentle. Walk with me a while. I rose and followed her, the stream winding beside us as we walked. The path was soft underfoot, lined with wildflowers that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. The air smelled of earth and rain, and the silence between us felt like a conversation all its own. After a while, the woman stopped and pointed to a tree ahead. It was old, its branches gnarled and twisted, its leaves a deep, shimmering green. At its base was a small hollow, just large enough for someone to sit inside. This is a place of rest, she said. Sit here a while. Let the tree hold you. I hesitated before stepping closer. The hollow was warm, almost inviting, and as I settled inside, I felt a strange sense of comfort, as though the tree were wrapping itself around me. The woman stood nearby, her gaze soft and watchful, and for a moment, I felt like a child being tended to. What is this place? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled faintly. It's a moment, she said. Just a moment. But sometimes that's enough. I closed my eyes, letting the tree's warmth seep into me. My mind began to drift, thoughts unraveling like threads, until there was nothing but the quiet. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I opened my eyes, the woman was gone. The stream still flowed beside me, its water catching the faint light of the stars. I rose and stepped toward it, feeling something shift inside me, not a big change, but a small one, like the smallest turn of a key. The air smelled of rain again, and the sky above seemed impossibly vast, its stars shimmering like fragments of a story waiting to be told. Somewhere in the distance, the bell tolled once more, its sound soft and lingering. I looked down at the stream, its surface smooth and still, and for the first time, I saw not just the stars, but the reflection of my own face, different now, softer, more at ease. The night stretched on, and I began to walk again, not knowing where I was going, but feeling, for the first time, that it didn't matter. The stars watched quietly, their light catching the edges of the clouds. And somewhere, far away, the train waited. The stream led me on, its gentle current a quiet companion as I walked. The night was vast and still, the stars a shimmering tapestry overhead, and the air carried the faintest scent of rain, though the sky remained clear. I didn't hurry. There was no need. The path felt like it was guiding me, as though it knew where I needed to go even if I didn't. After a while, the stream widened into a small pond, its surface smooth as glass. Around its edges grew reeds that swayed gently in the breeze, their soft rustling the only sound in the stillness. I knelt at the water's edge, peering into its depths. The reflection was strange, not just the stars, but something else, something faint and shifting. I thought of the pool in the forest, of the man's words. It shows not what is, but what could be. Here, in the pond, I saw flashes of light, like fireflies dancing just beneath the surface. They moved in patterns that felt deliberate, almost musical, and for a moment, I felt as though I were watching a story unfold. I dipped my hand into the water, the coolness sending a slight shiver up my arm. The fireflies scattered, their light dissolving into the darkness, and when I pulled my hand back, the water rippled gently, the reflection of the stars breaking apart for a moment before returning to stillness. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice was soft, almost melodic, and I turned to see a girl standing a few paces away. She was young, perhaps 12 or 13, her hair a tangle of curls that caught the starlight. She wore a simple dress that seemed to shimmer faintly, as though woven from the night itself. Her presence felt different from the man, and the woman, lighter, freer, as though she belonged to the air rather than the earth. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The girl stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the grass, and knelt beside me at the water's edge. "I like to come here," she said, her voice carrying a quiet joy. "The water tells stories if you listen." "What kind of stories?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, her gaze fixed on the pond. "All kinds. Stories of the past, the future, of places that exist and places that don't. Sometimes they're sad. Sometimes they're happy. But they're always true, even if they're not real." Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment, I thought of my own story, the life I'd left behind, the questions I'd been carrying. Here, in this place, they felt different, lighter, as though they were just one small part of something much larger. The girl dipped her hand into the water, her fingers trailing lightly across its surface. The fireflies returned, their light flickering in patterns that seemed to dance with her movements. "Do you want to hear one?" she asked, her tone soft and inviting. I hesitated before nodding. She closed her eyes for a moment, her hands still in the water, and then began to speak. Her voice was low and melodic, carrying a rhythm that felt ancient and familiar. "Once, there was a traveler who wandered through a forest of stars. The trees were tall and silver, their leaves shimmering like fragments of moonlight, and the air was filled with the sound of distant music. The traveler walked for days, weeks, years. Time meant nothing in that place. They weren't searching for anything, not exactly. They were just moving, letting the forest guide them. One night, they came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a tree, its branches stretching toward the sky like arms reaching for the stars. At the base of the tree was a hollow, just large enough for someone to sit inside. The traveler stepped into the hollow and felt something strange, a warmth, a comfort, as though the tree were holding them. They sat there for a long time, listening to the stillness. And then, slowly, they began to notice something. The tree wasn't just a tree. It was a doorway, a passage to another world. The traveler didn't step through. They didn't need to. They knew in that moment that they were already where they needed to be. The girl fell silent, her hands still in the water, the fireflies dancing around her fingers. The story lingered in the air, its warmth settling gently in my chest. "Is it true?" I asked after a moment. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting mine with a quiet knowing. "Does it feel true?" I hesitated before nodding. It did, more than anything I'd ever known. She smiled faintly, her expression filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Then perhaps that's all that matters." We sat in silence for a while, the pond's surface still and shimmering. The air around us felt calm, almost reverent, as though we were sharing something sacred. Eventually, the girl stood, her dress catching the faint glow of the moonlight. "The night is long," she said, her voice carrying a quiet promise. "But there's still more to see." I rose and followed her as she walked away from the pond, the fireflies fading into the darkness behind us. The path ahead was narrow, winding through tall grasses that swayed gently in the breeze. The air smelled faintly of wildflowers, their scent sweet and soothing. After a while, we came to a small hill. At its top stood a tree, its branches gnarled and twisted, its leaves a deep, shimmering green. The girl stopped at its base, her gaze soft and watchful. "This is a place of rest," she said, her voice gentle. "But it's also a place of beginnings. Sit here a while. Let the tree hold you." I hesitated before stepping closer. The tree's presence felt warm, almost inviting, and as I settled at its base, I felt a strange sense of comfort, as though it were wrapping itself around me. The girl stood nearby, her expression filled with something I couldn't quite name. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled faintly. "It's a moment," she said. "Just a moment. But sometimes that's enough." I closed my eyes, letting the tree's warmth seep into me. My mind began to drift, thoughts unraveling like threads, until there was nothing but the quiet. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I opened my eyes, the girl was gone. The night stretched on, the stars shimmering faintly above, and the air smelled faintly of rain. For the first time, I felt as though I were exactly where I needed to be. And somewhere, far away, the bell tolled once more, its sound soft and lingering. The stars watched quietly, their light catching the edges of the clouds. And the train waited. The bell's toll faded into the stillness, its echo lingering like a final note in a song. I sat beneath the tree for a while longer, the warmth of its embrace holding me as gently as a sigh. The night was quiet now, the stars above shimmering in a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. I didn't know how much time had passed, but it didn't matter. Time felt different here, looser, softer, as though it had unraveled to make space for something else. Eventually, I rose, my body feeling lighter than it had in years. The path ahead was faint, its edges blurred by the moonlight, but it was there, winding through the grass like a quiet invitation. I followed it without thought, my steps slow and steady, as though the earth itself were guiding me. The landscape began to shift again, though it happened so subtly I barely noticed. The hills flattened into a wide plain, the air grew cooler, and the stars seemed to lower themselves, as if they were reaching down to meet me. I thought of the woman by the stream, of the girl by the pond, of the man who had led me to the clearing. Each of them had left something with me, a word, a feeling, a moment of stillness. And though I didn't fully understand their purpose, I knew, in some quiet way, that they had been part of a journey I was still only beginning to comprehend. The path led me to a small station, its platform lit by a single lantern that cast a warm, amber glow. The station was simple, its wooden beams weathered by time, and the tracks stretched out into the darkness, their steel glinting faintly in the moonlight. I recognized it at once. It was the same station where I had begun, though it felt different now, not forgotten, but waiting, as though it had been holding its breath for my return. I walked to the edge of the platform, my footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the breeze carried the distant sound of leaves rustling, their whispers soft and soothing. I stood there for a moment, gazing down the tracks, and then I heard it, a low hum, faint but unmistakable, vibrating in the air like a song just beyond my hearing. The train slid into the station as gracefully as it had before, its silver body glinting like a shard of moonlight. The doors opened with the same whisper, and I stepped inside without hesitation. The car was just as I remembered it, warm, dimly lit, the air faintly sweet with the scent of worn leather and old paper. I chose the same seat by the window, settling into its deep crimson upholstery with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. The train began to move, its motion smooth and effortless, as though it were gliding on air rather than steel. I leaned my head against the window, watching as the landscape passed by in a blur of shadows and light. The hills, the forest, the pond, they all seemed to blend together, fading into a single, endless expanse. I thought of the stories the girl had told, of the reflections I'd seen in the water, of the warmth of the tree that had held me. They felt like pieces of a puzzle I was only starting to understand, but even so, they filled me with a quiet peace. The train slowed as we approached a station I didn't recognize. The platform here was small, its edges lined with lanterns that cast a soft, golden glow. The doors opened, and I stepped out, my breath catching in my throat as I looked around. This place was different from the others. It was a garden, vast and sprawling, its paths lined with flowers that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The air smelled of earth and rain, and the silence was filled with the soft hum of life, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of crickets, the faint ripple of water somewhere nearby. It felt alive, almost sentient, as though it were breathing with me. I began to walk, the path soft beneath my feet, the flowers brushing against my legs as I passed. The garden seemed to stretch on forever, its beauty almost overwhelming, but I didn't feel lost. I felt held. After a while, I came to a clearing. In its center stood a tree, its branches twisting upward like outstretched arms, its leaves shimmering faintly in the moonlight. At its base was a small bench, its wood worn smooth by time. I sat down, the quiet settling around me like a blanket. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness fill me. The garden seemed to hum, its energy soft and steady, and for a moment, I felt as though I were part of it, not separate, but connected, as though we were sharing the same breath. "You've come far," a voice said, soft and familiar. I opened my eyes and saw the man standing a few paces away, his shimmering robes catching the faint glow of the moonlight. He smiled faintly, his expression filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Is this the end?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, his gaze steady and calm. "It's a return," he said. "A return to yourself." His words lingered in the air, and for a moment, I thought of my life before this journey, the questions, the weight, the quiet ache I'd been carrying. Here, in this place, they didn't feel heavy. They felt like whispers, like stories that had found their endings. The man stepped closer, his presence warm and reassuring. "The train will take you back," he said. "But you'll carry this place with you." I nodded, the words settling gently in my chest. I didn't ask where the train would take me or what would happen next. It didn't seem necessary. The man smiled faintly, his expression filled with quiet understanding. "The night is long," he said, "but it will not last forever." He turned and walked away, his robe shimmering faintly against the flowers. I watched as he disappeared into the shadows, his presence leaving behind a warmth that lingered long after he was gone. I stood and walked back to the station, the garden's stillness following me like a whisper. The train was waiting, its doors open, its interior warm and inviting. I stepped inside, the scent of worn leather and old paper wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. As the train began to move, I leaned my head against the window, watching as the garden faded into the darkness. The stars above shimmered faintly, their light catching the edges of the clouds, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere, far away, the bell tolled once more, its sound soft and lingering. And as the train carried me forward, I closed my eyes, letting the quiet fill me. The night stretched on, vast and still, and I was exactly where I needed to be. The stars watched quietly, their light catching the edges of the clouds. And the water whispered, and I listened.